I'm Franklin. Today, we close the book on the man who redefined the meaning of the word monster. This is the story of Theodore Robert Bundy. To the world, he was an articulate law student, a rising star in the Republican Party, a man who worked at a suicide prevention hotline saving lives. But to the night, he was a void. A hollow shell driving a 1968 tan Volkswagen Beetle that would become the most notorious hearse in American history. The University District, where safety died. It began in the sleeping neighborhoods of Seattle. The University District was a place of open doors and unlocked windows, a sanctuary for young women starting their lives. The predator knew this. He didn't break down doors, he didn't need to. He was a chameleon. On January 31st, 1974, Linda Ann Healy, a 21-year-old student, vanished from her basement room. There was no sign of struggle, no broken glass. Just a bed made with military precision, a detail that didn't fit. When the police looked closer, they found a bloodstain on the mattress and a nightgown hanging neatly in the closet that Linda never wore. I've seen many crime scenes in my time, but this was different. This wasn't a crime of passion, a messy explosion of rage. This was cold, calculated. The intruder had entered, taken a life, and then taken the time to clean up. He had carried her out into the freezing darkness while her roommates slept upstairs. It was the act of a man who possessed a terrifying level of control, not just over his victims, but over himself. For months, girls kept disappearing. Donna Manson, Susan Rancourt, Roberta Parks. They were all similar. Young, beautiful, with long hair parted in the middle. They vanished on the way to jazz concerts, from campus lawns, from sorority houses. The police were baffled. There were no fingerprints, no witnesses, just a growing silence where vibrant lives used to be. The prop. Weaponizing empathy. What the humans didn't understand yet was the weapon. It wasn't a gun or a knife. It was empathy. The predator had realized a fundamental flaw in human nature. You are programmed to help the wounded. He would appear in public places, libraries, parking lots, with his arm in a plaster cast or his leg in a brace, struggling with a stack of books or trying to load a sailboat onto his car. He looked harmless, handsome, well-dressed. He looked like a brother, a boyfriend, a son. "Excuse me, could you give me a hand?" he would ask with a shy, charming smile. And the women, kind and unsuspecting, would help. They would walk with him to his car. They would lean in to place the books on the seat, and that's when the mask would fall. The passenger seat of his Volkswagen Beetle had been removed. It wasn't a car. It was a cage. A tire iron would strike, handcuffs would click, and the helpful neighbor would disappear into the floor well of the vehicle, invisible to the world passing by just inches away. The Lake Sam day, the monster in the sunlight. But the true scale of his arrogance was revealed on July 14th, 1974. It was a scorching Sunday at Lake Sammamish State Park. Thousands of people were there, families grilling burgers, kids splashing in the water, the smell of sunscreen and beer filling the air. In the middle of this crowd walked a handsome man in a white tennis outfit. His left arm was in a sling. He approached woman after woman, asking for help unloading a sailboat from his car. He introduced himself simply as Ted. He was seen by dozens of people. He spoke to Janice Ott, a probation caseworker. Witnesses saw her walk with him toward the parking lot. She was never seen alive again. 4 hours later, he returned. The audacity is chilling. He had already abducted and likely killed one woman, and he came back to the same park on the same day to hunt again. He found Denise Naslund. She went to the restroom and vanished. Think about that. In a park filled with 40,000 people, a man abducted 2 women in broad daylight, leaving nothing behind but a name, Ted, and a description of a tan Volkswagen, the phantom of the highway. By the fall of 1974, the Pacific Northwest was in a panic. A sketch was released, a generic, handsome face that could have been anyone. Friends of Ted Bundy joked that it looked like him, but they were joking, because Ted was nice. Ted drove them to the store. Ted studied law. Ted couldn't be the monster who was leaving bones on Taylor Mountain. He left Washington not because he was scared, but because he was finished with that hunting ground. He moved to Utah for law school. He packed his Beetle, his tire iron, and his demons, and he drove south. The Ted murders in Seattle stopped, but the nightmare was just migrating. The shadow was moving to the high desert, and the list of names was about to get much, much longer. The police were looking for a crazy man with wild eyes. They didn't realize they should have been looking for the man who opened doors for ladies and charmed the judge. The greatest trick the devil ever pulled wasn't convincing the world he didn't exist. It was convincing the world he was the boy next door. In the autumn of 1974, the shadow that had terrorized the Pacific Northwest drifted southeast, settling over the arid valleys of Salt Lake City. Theodore Bundy had arrived to attend law school at the University of Utah. To his professors and classmates, he was an eager, intelligent student with a bright future in politics. He wore turtlenecks, lived in a cheap rooming house, and blended perfectly into the Mormon community's trusting atmosphere. But beneath the veneer of the aspiring attorney, the hunger was growing more desperate and reckless. The Ted from Seattle had evolved. He was no longer just hunting. He was experimenting. The One Who Got Away. Carol Daranch, November 8th, 1974. A rainy Friday evening at the Fashion Place Mall in Murray, Utah. 18-year-old Carol Daranch was browsing a bookstore when a man approached her. He wasn't wearing a cast this time. He was dressed as a figure of authority, a police officer. He flashed a gold badge, later revealed to be stolen or fake, and introduced himself as Officer Roseland. He told Carol that someone had attempted to break into her car in the parking lot and that she needed to accompany him to the station to file a report. Trusting the badge, trusting the handsome face, she followed him. But when they reached his car, it wasn't a patrol cruiser. It was the battered tan Volkswagen Beetle. He explained it was an undercover vehicle. Carol got in. The drive was short and terrifying. Bundy drove erratically, eventually pulling onto a dark side street near an elementary school. The moment the car stopped, the officer vanished, replaced by the monster. He lunged at her, snapping a pair of handcuffs onto her wrist. But in his haste, he only secured one cuff. Carol Daranch fought for her life. Screaming, scratching, and kicking, she managed to open the door and tumble out onto the wet asphalt. Bundy wielded a crowbar, trying to subdue her, but the adrenaline of sheer terror gave her the strength to break free. She flagged down a passing car. For the first time, the phantom had a face that a living victim could describe, and on her wrist, she carried the steel evidence of his intent. The luck of the patrolman. Despite the close call, Bundy did not stop. He continued to kill, leaving a trail of bodies across the snowy peaks of Colorado. But arrogance is a blinding light. On August 16, 1975, at 2:30 a.m., Utah Highway Patrol Sergeant Bob Hayward was sitting in his cruiser in a quiet suburb of Salt Lake City. He noticed a tan Volkswagen cruising slowly through the dark streets, its headlights off. Suspicious, Hayward flicked on his lights. The Volkswagen floored it. It wasn't a high-speed chase, but it was the end of Bundy's anonymity. When Hayward finally pulled the car over at a gas station, the driver was polite, calm, and charming. He said he was lost, but Sergeant Hayward saw the missing passenger seat. He decided to search the car. What he found in the trunk became known as the murder kit. It was a collection of items that no law student would need for school. A crowbar, an ice pick, a coil of rope, handcuffs, a mask made from pantyhose, trash bags. The police finally had their man. Or so they thought. The Aspen Leap Bundy was extradited to Colorado to stand trial for the murder of Karen Campbell. But Ted Bundy was not a man who accepted cages. He fired his public defenders, arguing that he was a law student and could represent himself. This granted him special privileges, including access to the courthouse law library, without handcuffs or leg irons. June 7, 1977. Pitkin County Courthouse, Aspen. During a recess, Bundy was alone in the second-story law library. The guard was outside, smoking a cigarette. Bundy walked to the window. It was unlocked. He looked down. It was a 30-foot drop to the asphalt, but the fresh summer air smelled of freedom. He jumped. He hit the ground hard, injuring his ankle, but adrenaline masked the pain. He stripped off his jailhouse layers to reveal street clothes he had worn underneath and simply walked away into the town. For 6 days, one of the most dangerous men in America was loose in the Rocky Mountains. He broke into cabins for food, slept in the freezing woods, and evaded a massive manhunt involving helicopters and tracking dogs. He was eventually caught driving a stolen Cadillac, exhausted and delirious, but the message was clear. Ted Bundy was not afraid of the system. He was mocking it. He was returned to his cell, where the guards welded a steel plate over the window. But they underestimated him. They thought the window was his only way out. They didn't realize that for a man like Bundy, the entire ceiling was just another door waiting to be opened. The charming Shadow was already planning his next exit. And this time, he wouldn't just disappear into the woods. He would head for the sun, for Florida, where he would unleash a final, horrific storm that would burn his name into history forever. By the end of 1977, the walls of the Garfield County Jail in Colorado were closing in on Theodore Bundy. The authorities thought they had him secured behind steel plates and reinforced glass. They were wrong. Bundy had spent months studying the layout of his cell, noticing a flaw in the ceiling near the light fixture. He began to starve himself, losing over 20 pounds until his frame was skeletal enough to fit through a space barely 12 inches square. On the night of December 30th, while the jailers celebrated the coming new year, Bundy piled books and blankets in his bed to simulate a sleeping body. He climbed into the ceiling crawl space, navigated the ductwork, and dropped into the warden's apartment while the warden was out. He walked out the front door, stole a car, and vanished into the freezing Colorado night. By the time the ruse was discovered the next morning, Bundy was already 1,000 miles away. He was heading for the humidity, the neon lights, and the anonymity of Florida. The quiet before the screams. In January 1978, a man calling himself Chris Hagen checked into a rooming house in Tallahassee, just blocks away from the Florida State University campus. He lived a ghost-like existence, shoplifting food and stealing bicycles to get around. To his neighbors, he was just another face in a college town, quiet, unremarkable, perhaps a bit older than the average student. But the predator was unraveling. The calculated precision of the Seattle Ted was gone, replaced by a frantic, jagged impulse. He was no longer meticulously planning. He was stalking the shadows of the sorority houses, fueled by a dark energy that had been suppressed during his months in captivity. The night of January 15th, 1978, the Chi Omega sorority house was a sanctuary for nearly 40 young women. On that Sunday morning, around 3 a.m., the house was silent. The doors were locked, or so the residents thought. Bundy entered through a back door with a faulty lock. He wasn't carrying a badge or a plaster cast this time. He was carrying a heavy oak club. What followed in the next 15 minutes was a whirlwind of primal brutality that defied explanation. He moved from room to room with the speed of a nightmare. He attacked Margaret Bowman while she slept, then moved to the next bed and attacked Lisa Levy. Within minutes, 2 young women were dead, and 2 more, Kathy Kleiner and Karen Chandler, were left with catastrophic injuries. He didn't stop there. Driven by a frenzied bloodlust, he fled the Chi Omega house and broke into a nearby apartment, where he attacked Cheryl Thomas so severely that the vibrations of the struggle woke her neighbors. By sunrise, Tallahassee was a city paralyzed by terror. The police were looking for a monster, but they had no idea the monster was living in a $160 a month rooming house right under their noses. The final mistake. Kimberly Leach. Despite the carnage at FSU, Bundy stayed in Florida. His luck was holding, but his sanity was fraying. On February 9th, 1978, in Lake City, he committed his final and most tragic crime. He abducted 12-year-old Kimberly Leach from her junior high school in broad daylight. It was a reckless act that finally shattered his anonymity. Eyewitnesses saw a white van, which Bundy had stolen, and the description began to circulate. The man who had once been so careful was now leaving a trail of breadcrumbs across the state. The bite mark. An invisible signature. Bundy was eventually pulled over in Pensacola by Officer David Lee on February 15th. After a violent struggle, the most wanted man in America was back in handcuffs. He would never be free again. During the investigation into the Chi Omega murders, forensic specialists discovered a unique piece of evidence. On the body of Lisa Levy, the killer had left a deep, double indentation bite mark. In 1978, forensic odontology was a burgeoning field. While Bundy sat in his cell, confident that there were no fingerprints or eyewitnesses to connect him to the sorority house, investigators were making plaster casts of his teeth. His teeth were crooked, with a very specific alignment. The charming shadow believed he was the smartest man in the room. He believed that his legal knowledge and his charisma would once again allow him to dance through the cracks of the system. He didn't realize that he had left his own signature, his own physical stamp, etched into the flesh of his victims. It was a signature that no amount of charm could erase. The stage was set for the first nationally televised murder trial in American history. The monster was finally going to be put under the lights, and the world was about to see that the handsome law student was nothing more than a hollow man with a mouth full of jagged lies. In the summer of 1979, the eyes of the United States were fixed on a courthouse in Miami. It was the first time a murder trial had ever been broadcast nationally, and the star of the show was Theodore Robert Bundy. He didn't look like a prisoner. He looked like the leading man in a legal drama. He wore crisp suits, joked with the prosecution, and acted as his own defense attorney. He believed that if he could charm the cameras, he could charm the jury. But the charming shadow was finally standing in the light, and it was blinding. The trial of the century. The courtroom was Bundy's final stage. He treated the proceedings like a game of wits. In a move of bizarre theatricality, he used an obscure Florida law to marry his girlfriend, Carol Ann Boone, while she was testifying on the stand, proposing to her and declaring them legally wed in front of a stunned judge. But even this spectacle couldn't distract from the evidence. The forensic odontologists presented the plaster casts of Bundy's teeth, matching them perfectly to the bite marks left on the victims in the Chi Omega house. It was the smoking gun, made of bone and enamel. On July 24, 1979, the jury returned a verdict: guilty. Judge Edward Coward, while sentencing Bundy to death, uttered words that would haunt the public for decades. "It's a tragedy to this court to see such a total waste of humanity as I've experienced in this courtroom. You're a bright young man. You would have made a good lawyer, but you went another way, partner." The long wait in the shadow. For 9 years, Bundy lived in a cell on Florida's death row. He was no longer the handsome student. His hair grayed, his face grew gaunt, and the mask began to permanently disintegrate. He spent a decade filing appeals, exploiting every loophole in the American legal system to delay the inevitable. As his final execution dates approached in 1989, the charming shadow made one last desperate play. He began to talk. In a series of recorded confessions with investigators from across the country, Bundy finally admitted to dozens of murders he had previously denied. He took detectives on a macabre tour of his past, describing the locations of boneyards in Washington and Utah. He wasn't doing it out of remorse. He was bartering human lives for more time. He hoped that by revealing more victims, the governors would grant him stays of execution to finish the investigations. But the clock had finally run out. The families of the victims had waited long enough. January 24th, 1989. Old Sparky. The night before his execution, Bundy was a hollow shell. He spent his final hours weeping and talking on the phone with his mother. Outside the Florida State Prison in Stark, a different kind of spectacle was unfolding. Hundreds of people had gathered in the fields, carrying signs that read, "Burn Bundy, burn," and "Tuesday is Friday." They were grilling burgers and cheering, waiting for the smoke. At 7:06 a.m., Ted Bundy was led into the execution chamber. He was strapped into the oak chair known as Old Sparky. He looked through the glass at the witnesses, his last words a message to his family: "Give my love to my family and friends." At 7:16 a.m., the current was pushed. The man who had spent his life stealing the breath of others had his own breath taken by the state. When the white flag was raised outside the prison to signal his death, the crowd erupted in cheers as if their home team had won the Super Bowl. The legacy of a ghost, Theodore Bundy was cremated, and per his final request, his ashes were scattered in the Cascade Mountains of Washington, the very place where he had left so many of his victims. It was his final act of cold, poetic irony. Why do we still remember him? Because Bundy shattered the American illusion of safety. He proved that evil doesn't always wear a monstrous face. It doesn't always hide in the bushes. Sometimes it has a law degree. Sometimes it offers to help you with your groceries. Sometimes it's the person you've invited into your home. The charming shadow left behind a trail of at least 30 confirmed victims, though many believe the true number is closer to 100. He changed the way the FBI profiles serial killers and the way women walk to their cars at night. He taught us that the most dangerous predator is the one who knows exactly how to look human.